Hello and welcome to another installment of whatever this is. I was gonna do a more design-oriented video, but honestly, there's been something on my mind lately that I just really need to do. But before I do, I want to ask you guys who are watching, I know there's not a lot of you, but for those of you who do see these, can you just let me know what kind of content you're looking for? Because if you want more sort of pure design stuff, I can do that. Design analyses, I can do those. If you want more DnD stuff, I can do that too. In fact, if you asked me to just talk about DnD endlessly, I would just do that. That's not a problem. But let me know what you're looking for, because I kind of struggled coming up with a content idea for this. I have a few, but you know, just kind of wanted to, I don't know what you're interested in. So let me know. But today is all about improvising a combat encounter in D&D. And yes, this is absolutely a design principle, because design is the foundation of improvising anything that's gameplay. Because the idea is you're gonna need a design foundation. That's the most important thing. And there's a really important principle in design, which is that the thing feels a certain way, and that's not the same as the mechanics and the way that the thing actually is behind the scenes. So what that means in kind of a D&D context is that you need to be worried about creating the gameplay experience. And a lot of this comes down to, should you fudge dice or not? And here's the thing. Really, there is a good argument for and a good argument against, and I'm going to lay out both, and you can make your determination. The good argument for fudging is that the most important thing is that at the end of the day, you're creating the gameplay experience you're trying to create. It's the most important thing, and if that's your goal, which it should be, then if fudging a die makes it more likely that that gameplay experience unfolds, then yes, go right ahead. However, if you're fudging dice, you have a problem, because now the encounter that you build doesn't give you clear feedback that connects the design decision that you made when building the encounter with the player experience. You had to fudge the die to get that player experience. So you'll never know whether or not you had the right idea with your encounter design or not, which means if you start to fudge, you're going to be stuck fudging for a long time until you just kind of quit and go back to failing a lot before you figure out what works and what doesn't. Now that's important to consider, because as we move into actually improvising a combat encounter, obviously what we're talking about is designing a combat encounter very quickly. So there's a couple of tricks, but a lot of it really comes down to a really solid foundation, and for that, we're going to go to combat curves. And if you haven't seen the combat curves series, I highly recommend it. It's honestly some of my best work when it comes to game design analysis and game design frameworks, because it's very clean, it's very clear, and it connects specific curves with specific player experience outputs. So as long as you're sticking to that curve, you'll get that player experience. And if you get really good at designing curves, then you can create your own curves, which then also correspond to specific player experiences. That's really, really valuable when you're improvising an encounter, because then instead of going, I'm gonna just give them this curve and it's totally arbitrary, what you can do is you can go, what's the basic feeling that I want to evoke from this fight, and what curve does that? And then you just go, well, here's the feeling, therefore that connects to this curve, therefore this is the curve that I'm gonna use. Now all of the decisions that you make in that combat encounter as it goes along, because you're improvising it, all comes down to, how can I make this curve unfold better? That's the most important thing. Now there are a couple tricks, like I said, but they're specific to D&D 5th edition, and they're not really design things. They're sort of surface level things. But I'm going to go over them very quickly so that you just get a sense of what you can do to buy yourself some time to figure out how things are going to conform to your curve. So this all begins when initiative gets rolled. So you start with initiative. Now I recommend just putting your creature in the middle of initiative, because if you put the creature too early, then you have to figure out all of the offensive stuff that they can do, or at least something that's offensive that they can do really quickly. And that's one of the things that's harder to figure out. So because you want to really make decisions as late as you can possibly afford to make it, you want to start with somewhere in the middle of initiative. Now, the reason you don't want to go to the bottom of initiative is because if you're trying to make a curve unfold, you want that creature to have some effect on the battlefield before all of the players have taken their turn. If the players get a full turn of just wailing on a creature that they know almost nothing about, then the curve is totally flat for a bit, and you're probably already behind in trying to hit the curve. Now the second thing is AC. Let your players roll before you determine the AC, because again, if you can put it off another couple of turns, then great. If your players are rolling really high, then you don't need to determine the AC. If everyone's rolling over 20 for their to hit, then just don't worry about it until somebody does. As a general rule of thumb, as a starting point for AC, take your player's chance to hit and then add 8 to it. That's a good starting point. If you want it to be pretty hard to hit, add 1 or 2, depending on how hard you want it to be to hit. And if you want it to be pretty easy, subtract 1 or 2, depending on how easy you want it to be to hit. That's it. That's AC. The other thing you're going to have to deal with pretty quickly, potentially, is saving throws. So the way that I would do saving throws really quickly is to just look at what your players have for saving throws for their spell save DC and just go, that's about right. Just remember that if there's one creature, you probably want it to be a little bit higher than that. If you have a lot of creatures, you want it to be a little bit lower than that. If you have a whole bunch of creatures, then you want it to be probably quite a bit lower than that. But that's your starting point, is roughly what your player's spell save DC is. It's a good rule of thumb to start with. It'll put them about on par. Now, next you might think is, probably hit points, right? No, hit points are actually the last thing you do. Actually, you don't do hit points at all. Just don't give your monster hit points, because what you want is to create a curve. So once you've nailed the curve, your creature dies. That's it. The encounter ends when the curve is completed. When it's resolved the way you want it to resolve, you end the encounter. How do you end the encounter? Everything dies. How does that work? The next time somebody hits this creature, it dies. Like, that's it. That's what you need to do. And there are going to be some like contextual scenarios where that doesn't quite work and you have to figure out how to make that work. But they're going to be pretty minor decisions. And for the most part, you just want your creature to die. But if you're getting close to resolving your curve, then you need to be starting to think about, how am I going to have this thing die? Now, the actual curve itself, if you understand curves, is really, really simple. I mean, it's difficult to do, but it's relatively simple in principle, because once you have your curve, don't track your combat based on number of rounds or any other way of tracking combat. I mean, obviously you want to track turn order, but what you want to do is you want to have basically like a marker. If you can, get out a little sheet of paper or something and go, here's what the curve I'm trying to hit is, and then take another pen of a different color, if you can, and try to draw what the curve actually is as the players are going through it. Because that will tell you what you need to do in order to either bring the intensity up or let the intensity fall. And that's going to tell you what offensive abilities and defensive abilities your creature has. A couple quick things to consider. If you have a really dynamic curve with a lot of spikes and falls, then you probably want a creature with a lot of legendary actions, because you want something that's doing a lot of things a lot of the time. But you also want a lot of misses. You can also have intensity spikes defensively if your enemies have pretty high AC. So for example, if you're a player and you roll maybe a 19 total to hit, and you go, I rolled a 19, and you go, 19 misses, your players are going to go, oh my god, that's a really high AC. So you have to be thinking about how you can create these intensity curves actually land. But the most important thing is that you have that foundation, and you're never going to actually completely nail your intensity curve all the way through. That basically never happens. But having an encounter that builds around that intensity curve does definitely work really well. And I promise you, when you've figured out a really concrete goal for what you're trying to accomplish with that encounter, I promise you the decisions that you make in game on the fly as you build the encounter by the seat of your pants, it will become much clearer which decisions to make and which not to make. Well, how much chance to hit should I give this creature? Well, everyone's at full health. I've rolled really low on every attack before this. So on this legendary action that it hasn't used yet, I'm going to make it a pretty high DC saving throw. Why? Because I need intensity up. I need the intensity to rise so that I can start hitting this curve so that I can get that player experience. So I'm going to give it something that's pretty scary. But also, if I just give it that, then I have to come up with a reason for why it doesn't use it every round. So why don't we just make it 2 or 3 legendary actions worth to actually use it? Now it can only use it once per round at most. and it's probably not that efficient. So now you've got an excuse to not use it when you need to not use it, and you can pull it out when you need to spike intensity. So you give yourself these tools to work with, and remember that what the player experiences is just thing after thing after thing. So as long as once you finally commit to something, you write it down and don't move from it, your players won't know the difference. And I really mean it. When you get really good at this, players won't know when you've improvised something when you don't. If you ask my players what things that I've done that are improvised versus what things aren't, they will have no idea. There is really no distinction from the player's perspective what is and isn't improvised. And I improvise a lot. Like, I don't know what the actual percentage is, but it's probably close to 50-50. So that's it. This was a little bit of a different video. This was really me just kind of talking at the camera for a bit. I know you probably want something with some graphics, and there will be. I think I'll probably do another video this week because this was just something that was really kind of in the back of my mind that I wanted to get my thoughts on it out. It is very much a design process, this was a very different kind of video too because I really just kind of threw my thoughts out there. It wasn't really very structured. I don't really have any visual aids, and it's a bit longer. But I would, if you let me know in the comments what kind of content you're after. Also, let me know if this format worked for you because it's probably a little bit more suited to like listening. If you're not watching it and you're really just listening to it like on the bus or something, it's probably better for that. Anyway, that's it for me. Let me know those two things, and I'll probably get a video out this week at some point. So I'll see you then. Goodbye.